Support for the Scouted Football podcast is brought to you by Manscaped, the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. Manscaped is trusted by over 2 million men worldwide. Join the movement for all your below-the-waist grooming needs. Get 20% off and free delivery with the code SCOUTED20 at manscaped.com. Hello, welcome back, Scouted Football podcast fans. It is that time of the week, time to get our teeth into some of the under-23 football scouting tactics and whatever this week has thrown up in the world of football. Whether you're listening at home, on your commute, as you work out, or just out on a little stroll, all of us as Scouted appreciate massively you taking the time out to support our work. But that's enough of the niceties. It's pod time, and this week we return to Germany, where there is some managerial chopping and changing, both now and at the end of the season. The big one, though, is Marco Rosa switching Borussia Mönchengladbach, who he guided to the Champions League knockouts this season, for Borussia Dortmund, replacing Edin Terzić, who has been in interim charge since Lucien Favre's sacking earlier this season. That managerial transfer will take place later this year when the season comes to a close. And it's one that's exciting for a number of reasons, which we'll get into in due course. First, though, and without further ado, it's time to introduce this week's guest. I'm delighted to say that Jasmine Baba is on the Scouted panel, joining us from Germany as well. So very authentic to be discussing a German topic on the pod. Jasmine is a footballing consultant, editor, writer, owner of many fine football shirts, past and present, has to be said. She's a regular on the World Football Index podcast, which I implore any world football fans to check out. But that's me droning on long enough. Jasmine, how are things with you?
Oh, they're good. Busy. I think we have all, not had enough of club football, but it's definitely wearing me down. I think it's a Bundesliga story after Bundesliga story at the moment, and I can't actually keep up anymore.
Yeah, it is. We've seen a lot of discussion around whether players are tired of sort of the congested schedule, but spare a thought for people like you and I, who are just trying to keep up to date.
Yeah, just really never ending. But the funniest thing was that when the international break was going ahead, I just went, I don't know what my life is without club football. I want it back. Almost like I can't really take a break. I'm not sure what exactly I'm going to do during the summer.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, it'll be the European Championships and the under-21 Euros. The knockout rounds are on just before that. So, I mean, if you do find yourself at a loose end, I'm sure we could do with the extra help at Scouted, to say the least. But in terms of you live in Germany, you obviously have a very involved life in terms of football. How did that all come about?
I still ask myself that same question because I was not from a footballing background at all. I was actually in school for music in my uni years. I dropped out because it didn't feel right. Worked in retail, really average, like retail, then customer service. Went into gambling customer service and worked on website content for a while, then went to another firm, worked on website content, which was more like writing byline, short little editorials. And then around 3 years ago now, I landed an editorial role in the gambling industry. And that's when kind of writing an editorial became my main expertise. I got to work with loads of amazing people who wrote for us on the site, and also started producing podcasts. And sometime last year, I kind of felt like I had run myself into a dead end, and I was writing more at the time. So I tried to just mix it all up. Came to Germany, and then I ended up as a editor for the International Football Institute, which is also quite researching based as well. So I do quite a lot of scouting in my free time. And yeah, somehow just landed here, just reporting loads of little things you might not hear from Germany, or you do hear, but sometimes us little folk can get out a story first.
I know what you mean. Would it be fair to say that you have you developed some sort of an affinity with Borussia Mönchengladbach in that time then?
Yeah, I think especially being in England, I've always that a lot of football is accessible, and I've always dipped in and out with German football. It's always been my favourite second league. Well, it's probably now my first favourite league, but after the Premier League, the one that I watched the most. But it was only in the last like 2-3 years again that when I was working, that I had more time to watch it, needed to know a little bit more, and I think Borussia Mönchengladbach, especially when Rosa came in, was actually quite fun and everyone was talking about them. So I started to follow them from there, and I think anyone who's been in England knows the kind of love for either bigger teams who win stuff, so like Bayern Munich, or if Dortmund had a massive kind of fan base, and so did Schalke. And I'm not one to go with the crowd, so I went with Mönchengladbach instead.
A little bit avant-garde then.
Yeah, and like you see some of the players that you could fit into your own team. So in my case was Arsenal, and you had, especially with Marcus Thuram, player Zakaria, you could see them fitting like a glove in Arsenal's philosophy, and especially in the days of Arsene Wenger, what he would have done with those kind of youngest players, maybe unearthed players. And I think if he was still at the club and still had his eye on the German league, I mean, he brought Granit Xhaka over, which I know can cause some controversy, but um, but Granit Xhaka at the time, it was amazing what he had done for Arsenal, because there's some stats that you can deep dive in and be like, well, you can't take this stat out of context because you don't know the teams they faced in that stat and this and that. But there's an amazing stat, and it was only became untrue, I think, when Arsenal beat Man United this year earlier in the season, that it was the first game that they had won away without Granit Xhaka since 3 months before Granit Xhaka joined Arsenal. Which,
Oh right, okay.
yeah,
I mean, that was something that I was completely unaware of.
I know, and
So
yeah, and you can say like, oh, you don't know what teams they face at the time, but if you have a, a stat running for around 3 years like that, that is not to do with what teams you face. That is a player influence.
yeah, exactly. That's no coincidence there. I remember I saw a bit of data viz a little while back. It might have actually been last week, but there was a bit where it was I think it was progressive midfield passes, and Granit Xhaka was very much up there with your Manuel Locatellis, your Dani Parejos, those types of players. And there was a little sort of label next to it, which just had shock, which next to Xhaka's name, and you thought, well, I mean, it is a bit, but at the same time, if you sort of viewed Arsenal games through that lens and you sort of looked out for those progressive passes, then yeah, actually he does show up very well. And I think sometimes it is those underlying things that players sometimes don't get the credit for.
Yeah.
But in terms of today's podcast topic, that is of course Borussia Mönchengladbach, Marco Rosa, and the move that he's going to make to Borussia Dortmund in the summer. So there's a fair bit to unpack there. But I put the plan to you, and we discussed it, and sort of we decided that we'd do sort of a little brief summary to begin with, and I think because of the the amount of content that we will have to get through and sort of permutations and whatnot, it'll probably be best to sort of gloss over this. But for anybody who wasn't aware, Borussia Mönchengladbach, their heyday was in the 1970s. They won a flurry of European titles. They got to a number of finals. But then over the last 5 years or so, they had Andre Schubert at the helm as the manager. They finished fourth in 2016. Then Dieter Hecking took over, back-to-back ninth place finishes, and then a fifth place finish in 2019 before Marco Rosa took over. Whereas with Borussia Dortmund, they obviously had Thomas Tuchel between July 2015 and May 2017, a second place and a third place finish there. Then they went through a little bit of managerial turmoil with Peter Bosz and Peter Stoger in 2017 and 18. And then Lucien Favre took over, oversaw back-to-back second place finishes behind Bayern Munich, of course, but there was just that festering discontent there that there wasn't really enough going on in the way of the Borussia Dortmund way. So I think Jasmine, if you'd like to sort of do the summary of Marco Rosa's time, because I think his route to top level football management has been an interesting one. Quite a few subplots and quite a few interesting characters that he's come across along the way.
Yeah, I mean, him as Salzburg manager, well, under 18s, that's where he came after Leipzig, not the RB Leipzig, but the smaller Leipzig team. Um, he done really well, basically won the youth league, the UEFA Youth League, as well as the Austrian under 18 league. So he did the double. And it was a real surprise for that team. I mean, we know what Red Bull as a kind of farm sister club, everything that they can do, and they've just done an amazing job. I know I sound a bit propagandary here, but the way that they've set up this kind of farming system is pretty amazing and really started to get on the map at around that time, I would say. So he won the double in his first season, and around I think that year he then got promoted to Red Bull Salzburg manager, which was quite a surprise because everyone in the running thought the assistant coach, I can't remember the name, I forgot to write it down, but there was an assistant coach at the time that everyone was expecting to go up. His time at Red Bull Salzburg manager was really quite unbelievable when you think about his unbeaten at home record throughout the 2 years he was there. He did an amazing job because he got the Bundesliga title and also went through to the Europa League semis in his first year, beating his now new club, Borussia Dortmund, on the route. But also, things like get glossed over during his first year, especially, is that he took a while to get going. I think it wasn't until the 15th match week in that year that until they actually took first place lead, which for Red Bull Salzburg in the Austrian Bundesliga was actually quite a shock, and it was quite slow. They've had some dominance over that league for some time, so he has shown that he still has some flaws even from his Salzburg tenure that we can't really gloss over. In Salzburg, he also didn't qualify for the Champions League in his 2 years there. The first manager to do that after that was Jesse Marsch. But obviously, after his 2 years, two Austrian Bundesliga titles, he got the Borussia Mönchengladbach job, where it's been quite a wild ride. The first season he was there after Dieter Hecking was a really interesting one because they led the table in the Bundesliga after a few weeks, and they wouldn't just let it up. And I think they were, compared to Dieter Hecking's Gladbach, they were more intensive. They brought in reinforcements in Stefan Leiner and Marcus Thuram. It was something that worked to his style really, really well, or what is supposedly his style. And they made the Champions League. Now, their form after the COVID suspension wasn't the best. They lost Dennis Zakaria for a good 9 months. He didn't come back until November just gone. So they didn't have their squad to what they normally like. This season has been completely different. There was a slight overperformance from them from the year before. There's obviously COVID, a tired out squad from Champions League, and it seems like none of Rosa's past managerial qualities, tactically or man management, hasn't seemed to work. And with the announcement of him going to Dortmund, completely cut that man management aspect to the Gladbach falling through the table that we see at the present moment, which is quite bad for them in terms of being so good and getting Europe 2 years in a row to not having any Europe is still a blow, no matter what. Actually, we know what manager will come in next, but yeah, I keep on forgetting that the deal is done, looks to be done, and I can't really speculate any longer. But
Yeah, the speculation part of this podcast has kind of been thrown out the window by the news that came out this week that Adi Hütter, of course, Eintracht Frankfurt's manager, is very likely to become the Borussia Mönchengladbach manager, taking over the helm from Marco Rosa next season. But yeah, I think that summary of Rosa's sort of career, his managerial career to date, has been. I mean, it's exactly what I would have said. You know, he's he's taken players who are, I think, especially in the Mönchengladbach case, you know, he's taken players who weren't stars and made them into, you know, very, very saleable assets. You know, you look at the likes of Stefan Leiner and Marcus Thuram, who you mentioned, and, you know, Thuram was coming from Guingamp, and don't get me wrong, he was very good there, but he was, you know, I think Rosa and his team certainly identified a player in a relatively poor Ligue 1 team as they were at the time, and, you know, playing him on that left and in that left forward role has just opened up, especially in that first season, opened up so many possibilities, and, you know, rightly so, they became a Champions League club as a result. And obviously with Stefan Leiner, even the likes of Hannes Wolf, you know, he brought them to Gladbach from different clubs because he'd worked with them both at Salzburg. And I think that's something that we'll get onto in a little bit, sort of speculating over whether there'll be players going to Borussia Dortmund from Gladbach, following Rosa there. But in terms of from your Gladbach sort of sphere, from the lens that you're viewing this managerial transfer through, what are your initial sort of thoughts and feelings on Marco Rosa? First of all, it being announced so early while the season's still ongoing, but then how are you going to cope with him being at another club?
I think he was specifically good for Gladbach, and I think everything was suited there. I think everyone really believed in Rose's Gladbach. Now, I am a fan of him. I'm a fan of him being Gladbach manager, but I'm not gonna put on green, white, and black glasses and tell you he's the best manager to ever come to Gladbach. I think there are certain flaws of his game. I think, especially, I wrote a piece this season where we still describe Gladbach as a high intensity team, and that's not really the truth at all. Even last season, even though they were better at it, you couldn't really class them as a high intensity team. People seem to have this idea that Rose is very counter-attacking, high intensity, but it suited at Red Bull Salzburg because of the players that they had. I think the players that they had there were just basically Mönchengladbach's team, but on performance enhancing drugs to fit that to fit that like kind of style. There was no way he couldn't be that. And when he came into Gladbach, when he brought Liner into Turam, that was two people to really push that kind of tactic, and it hasn't really come off. I mean, they're still in most in most KPIs of being that sort of team, they're under league average. So his experiment and his tactical nous is still just slightly lacking. I mean, you know, not everyone's going to be a Thomas Tuchel, not everyone's going to be a Pep Guardiola, not everyone will have the kind of tactical brain to know how to set up against the low block and keep beating them repeatedly. But we're not seeing any kind of one strong suit that maybe Dortmund need. I'm personally, actually, I think we're going to get onto that, so I won't ruin you asking me the question. But yeah, so I think because Dieter Hecking was so possessional based, and I think it was such a change. Rose might have struggled a bit to really put his stamp on, if he had a stamp. I think one of his best qualities is his man management, which is why when the Dortmund news was broke out that it tumbled quite vastly. But I think this is what worries me. Does Gladbach need to go more to what they were under Dieter Hecking, where they were quite solid, or do they need to go even more counter-attacking? And their players, who will remain, and what kind of structure will they fit?
Yeah, essentially, from what I've gathered from watching little bits and pieces of Gladbach, I mean, particularly in Europe, is that they're a team who play aggressively. Obviously, those wide forwards that I mentioned, players like Florian Neuhaus, who are have the ability to pick locks essentially and break teams down with real creative quality. But I think one of the things that myself, sort of being based in the UK and not watching a Marco Rosa team every week, is that the things that we read are that that there is this perceived tactics and perceived style that you've obviously just touched on there. Would you say that that's been a particular draw for the Dortmund hierarchy? That they've identified Rosa as a potential manager that they think is somebody who might align more closely with what they want on the pitch, because obviously that was one of the reasons that Lucien Favre left, was that it was perceived that he wasn't getting the best out of the fantastic young players that they've got there at Dortmund. Is Marco Rosa the man to I mean, it's a very macro question, but is Marco Rosa the man to appease the Dortmund hierarchy purely by playing, I don't know, maybe more attractive football?
Oh, probably not. I get criticized for coming off a bit too pessimistic, but I only feel that I say what the truth is, and I think especially Rosa's Gladbach. I think Rosa's Gladbach in general hasn't been great in possession. They struggled to find solutions in possession. They, like, in all of their kind of games this season, they've done better where they haven't had the ball and have tried to attack from suddenly recovering a second ball or something. So it depends on really what Dortmund want, which, to be honest, they've had a massive um, Klopp-shaped hole, like chip on the shoulder even, and since then they've seemed to struggle of knowing what they want. Um, like they probably had, I mean, they had Thomas Tuchel, the only manager who has won something under Dortmund since Klopp left, and they couldn't stick with him because he wasn't, we all know what Tuchel is like with senior members of the board. He can be quite hard to work with, but he's one of the best managers out there, especially tactically. And, it happened with Peter Bosch because the Peter Bosch experiment didn't work, the Lucien Favre thing didn't work, and wouldn't I wouldn't say Rose is better or worse than Lucien Favre. So I think it's more to do with the actual character and the charismatic side of Marco Rosa. But what's interesting about that, if you're going for the more man management and charismatic side of it, is that they still want to keep Edin Terzić about, and that's going to make things quite awkward because Edin Terzić gets along with all the club, the board, the players, and you don't see that a lot, especially during, like, across the Dortmund players. There's almost a spat every other month. So if they have got him for his man management, but they all kind of go to Terzic more, is that going to become a problem when things start to go wrong? Because inevitably they will. You're not always going to go
Yeah.
through a good patch, unless you're, again, no, even the best managers go through bad phases. It's how you get out of them. And I don't see how that kind of relationship is going to work at Dortmund.
potentially some clashing personalities then, which I think, show me a football club which thrives when there are clashing personalities. I mean, I don't think there are too many that do. But it's interesting that you mentioned the Klopp shaped hole, or rather chip on the shoulder at the beginning there, because it's interesting the relationship that Jurgen Klopp and Marco Rosa have shared, and that was because Rosa was essentially a Zwei Bundesliga, a lower league, not journeyman, but sort of he wasn't really going to sort of break into the upper echelons of German football until Jurgen Klopp brought him in his Mainz team, and sort of they worked together for a few years. So yeah, there's some element of Klopp disciple there, which I think I've read. I'm not sure I completely believe it from what I've seen, but I think that there's certainly a semantic pull there in terms of what Dortmund might want to get back, because of course Jurgen Klopp and Borussia Dortmund, they were the glory days, so you can see why it would be tempting and it would be an attractive proposition to bring in somebody who has worked closely with Klopp, but onto sort of the question over whether Borussia Mönchengladbach might see some of their players leave to join Marco Rosa at Borussia Dortmund. I mean, of course, this is purely speculation, but you mentioned his man management and how that's possibly one of the more redeeming aspects of his managerial skill set. And you think, well, you look at qualifying for the Champions League with the squad that he did the season before last. Of course, it's a very big achievement, but at the same time, as we mentioned earlier, they weren't world beaters. So he clearly did get a lot out of the tools that he had at his disposal. I'm looking at the sort of the under-23 players in particular, because they'd fit to the age demographic that there is at Dortmund. Although I will say, you can't build a title-winning. At the risk of sounding like Alan Hansen, you can't build a title-winning team nowadays, perhaps without at least a bit of experience. And just sort of looking down the Dortmund squad list, you have the likes of Jude Bellingham, Erling Haaland, Youssoufa Moukoko, Gio Reyna, Jadon Sancho. All of these players fantastically talented, but all under 23. Could you perhaps see Dortmund maybe moving for some of these Gladbach players who worked really well under Rosa, or is that something which is it's too far in the future for us to even predict?
Well, this is the thing. Marco Rosa says he wouldn't do this, but I think we all know from a football perspective, when someone says they won't do this or that, it tends to happen more often than not. Um, I think it also depends on who Dortmund lose. I think that's a very massive step on them bringing whoever Rosa wants into the team. There's obviously the likes of Sancho, as you said, Haaland, the two most likeliest to leave, especially Haaland, if they don't end up with Champions League football next season. Then there's the money of, I think, going into, if they end up in the Europa League this season, wouldn't be the worst financial situation or player pulling situation, but I think they would lose the likes of Jadon Sancho and Holland. So then it's up to the board if they want to take Gladbach players or they think they're a right fit. There's two things. So there's one, that's one. The second is if Marco Rosa has much pulling power at Gladbach, because it seems to be that he's lost some of the players. It's not like the players don't play for him or play against the club, but I don't think a lot of them maybe perhaps believe in his team that he's going to be at Dortmund at the moment. I mean, we can only speculate what's gone on behind closed doors and at that club, but I don't think he has much pulling power over some of them, especially when the brightest talents, let's say Zakaria from Gladbach, Neuhaus, have kind of rumours about them surrounding with the likes of Man City and Bayern. They won't have as much pulling power as those two clubs. So I actually think it's more likely to be the older ones that would possibly take a chance with him. But they might just be like, it honestly depends on how his pulling power's gone, really, because I don't know if any. I think I can see a few of the more talented ones, if they don't receive an offer, they would go join him because it's still Dortmund at the end of the day.
Mm.
But you've got so much talent there. Like, okay, Jadon Sancho goes. Okay, you've got Knauf ready to go, and that's and then you've got Mukoku ready to go. I know he's injured at the moment, but that's still an amazing squad, and I don't think Dortmund will want to spend that much more on Gladbach players because they know the quality that they've got.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, my next question was sort of going to be, okay, then, where does this leave Borussia Mönchengladbach? But now knowing that Adi Hütter is likely going to be there, I suppose that does kind of clear things up. And I saw a tweet from Karen Tawani, who has been on this podcast before to discuss the Red Bull clubs. That he posted a tweet about Adi Hütter and the work that he's done with strikers before. And the goals tallies that they've got. I mean, just this season, Andre Silva at Frankfurt has done fantastically well under Hutter. There was the famous duo of Seb Haller and Luka Jovic a couple of seasons back, and they were particularly prolific during that sort of Europa League run that they had. And even going further back to sort of Jonathan Soriano at Red Bull Salzburg, who remarkably got 46 goals in 49 appearances. Um, all of these players playing under Adi Hütter. So I suppose that's where it leaves Borussia Mönchengladbach, not exactly in a bad spot. Taking a manager from a club who are currently higher than them in the table. But by way of sort of young players coming through at Gladbach, would you say that there are any that say people should be taking note of? Are there any Knaufs at Gladbach? Are there any Mokokos at Gladbach that we should be keeping an eye on?
There's actually that's really interesting because with Adi Hütter now going to Gladbach, I wonder if more players would be more like willing to stay just because of how good of a manager he is. They've seen,
Mm.
as you said, rightly said, they've seen what he's done at Salzburg. They've seen what he's done at Frankfurt this season. And I remember that Europa League run very, very clearly because there was a few bad results at the Emirates against them.
There was indeed, yeah.
Like, we also have a joke that Daichi Kamada is an Arsenal legend. So, but yeah, there's two in particular that I really like the look of at Gladbach coming that they've got in the youth ranks, younger players. It's so firstly, you don't hear much of young players in defence, but Jordan Bayer is one that he came actually got some game time just due to the suspensions and injuries Gladbach have had in defence. Um, and he looks like a good prospect. He wants to play at fullback, but he is a centre back at the moment. But yeah, he's a 20-year-old. He's worth around 2 million, and yeah, he's a centre back, and he looks quite comfortable on the ball. And it's someone that he probably wouldn't push out Ginter or Vedi at the moment, but he is a very exciting one to watch. The other one is Rocco Reeds, and he caused a little bit of outrage, not him himself, but another 18-year-old who's centre midfielder, and he's a little bit on the short side, but he's very, very technical. So the outrage he caused was that when they were against Man City and basically down and out in the Champions League, everyone wanted Rosa to put him on to actually, get some game time, show him off a bit. But he didn't. So it's a little bit of it was a little bit sad that we've not seen more of him this season. But he's a good central midfielder, which could be like with the likes of probably Zakaria Neuhaus leaving. He's a good one to then make that step up into the middle of the pitch.
All right, I see. I mean, I'd come across Jordan Bear before, but I hadn't heard Rocco Reitz. I'm disappointed in myself actually because that's a fantastic name first and foremost, and also that's the type of player that I do sort of become attached to. But I suppose if he hasn't really been playing very much for Gladbach, I just had a look there. He's only got the one Bundesliga appearance. Then yeah, I can see why. But there's if it, usually you can tell within a club's fan base who the best players are because there's rightly so there's excitement around them. So if there's a bit of intrigue around them there, then around Reitz there, then yeah, I think he could be one that could benefit from sort of the tutelage of Adi Hütter, given his track record with young players and obviously the Salzburg link and connection. So yeah, I'll keep those two sort of in my back pocket, but yeah, it's good to know that obviously that it doesn't completely leave Gladbach in a bad spot if they do end up selling Zakaria or Neuhaus or those types of players. Get 20% off and free delivery with the code SCOUTED20 at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free delivery at manscaped.com. Use code SCOUTED20. Your balls will thank you. I suppose that takes us on to sort of a Borussia Dortmund forecast then, and back to Marco Rosa, because I mean we discussed the young players that Dortmund have, and we could probably do an episode on them alone. I mean, we certainly could, because there are just so many, and they're all so. I mean, it's like
They're all lined up, just waiting, and be like, oh, they're probably just being like, I hope Sancho, Bellingham, and Holland will leave. So then we got the next lot up. When you hear like the Manchester United rumors over Sancho, you're just like, just skip him if he costs too much, and just go for Knauf instead. He's amazing.
well, they basically did that, didn't they? But just instead got Ahmad Traore. But yeah, I mean, it cost them probably about 40% of what Sancho would have. But I mean, we're not saying that Ahmad Traore is going to get 15 goals and 15 assists that next season. That's not what we're saying. But yeah, I know what you mean. Like there is just a conveyor belt of just players who are ready to step in. And I was really surprised when I sort of looked at the teams for the Manchester City quarterfinal, and I just saw Knauf there, and I thought, I mean, yeah, okay, fine. Edin Terzić clearly knows his stuff. He thinks that he's going to be ready to just be thrown in there. But I mean, even before we get onto the Haalands and the Reyners, and the Bellinghams, as you mentioned rightly, so the Knaufs. I mean, they, they just are so well stocked with young players. But I suppose for me, sort of from the outside looking in, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, okay, Marco Rosa, he's worked wonders with Red Bull Salzburg. Admittedly, took some time to get off the ground, but started to do well there. He's done well with sort of players 24 and under at Gladbach. If I'm Michael Zorc, I'm looking at that thinking, well, is Marco Rosa the man I need to galvanize this young team into genuine title contenders rather than the perpetual nearly men that they've come to be known post Klopp?
I don't know. I think there's loads of managers they could have gone and I could have answered a little bit more coherently about it. Like a part of me is like if they wanted a genuine title contenders, uh, okay, they probably did go for Nagelsmann, couldn't get him.
Hmm.
Why not Adi Hütter? Just skip
Yeah, true.
them because look, he's a guy who obviously he did it in front of everyone. He was beating Dortmund at their own game. It's like, from my perspective, that would have been my next move. You either get the best, okay, the best said no, then you go to the second best who's beating you and beating your spot into the Champions League, who fits in the same sort of philosophy as well. More Bundesliga experience, more actually doing it right now, same sort of players, more into youth, bringing them up, which makes me think, is he not a man manager? Is he not getting on with those people? Because to me, that's kind of crazy that there was someone better suited and that more people better suited and this was their pick in the end, or maybe it was just too much money. I don't know. But Yeah, unfortunately, I do feel like Rose is going to be another nearly men manager, only because he lacks the in possession tactics that he needs to actually challenge. And, the, there's a number of tactics that you could have taken to any team in the Bundesliga. You've got Wolfsburg's kind of a highly defensive structure, which works really well. Leipzig's just tactical flexibility. They don't have a out and out striker as they've wanted or had in Timo Werner, but has somehow mounted a title challenge. You've got Frankfurt, who's beating the best and has basically been the second best team since they got one of their losses earlier in this season. And instead, you've got the one that probably fails in the kind of a plan A, a plan B in possession, and you can't win everything with counterattacks because if you do that against the likes of Man City or Bayern, you're normally going to end up kind of on your ass.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most sophisticated way of putting it, because that is just what happens. Like you just can't you can't help but, I mean, we've seen it a lot with Dortmund since they've taken Terzić in the interim role, but they do just forfeit possession a lot more. It does seem just so much more much less refined than when you're watching a Bayern Munich, for example, where everything's crisp and everything's sort of and to be fair, to the same extent, Leipzig, everything is just so much more refined, to use the same word. Whereas with Dortmund, there's more room for error, and you do see that a little bit more. I think if yeah, from my estimation of it, is that I think we'll probably see more of the Terzic style of Dortmund under Marco Rosa than the Lucien Favre style, which yes, will probably make for entertaining football. I think that for anybody from a neutral perspective, will probably think that we saw the Gladbach games against Real Madrid in the Champions League this season. They were great fun from a neutral perspective, but if you were a fan on the edge of your seat or at the edge of your sofa, then I think you probably would have gone. You wouldn't need a nail file, put it that way. I think you'd say very similar sort of style at Dortmund, and that is actually. I'm sort of taking that into account of they're going to keep Haaland and Sancho, which again looks unlikely given that they're going to have to breach a 7-8 point gap to Frankfurt in fourth. So I think the end of the Bundesliga season is certainly going to be very interesting to see where these three managers and three teams end up, because obviously we know that they'll be taking on different roles on the first game of next season. So it does make for certainly for off pitch antics. Does make for interesting reading, to say the least. But I just wanted to get finally on Dortmund. I wanted to get your thoughts on this. But hypothetically speaking, and as we've discussed, it's fairly unlikely. But if there were no major incomings and outgoings this summer at Dortmund, how would you see Marco Rosa setting up this Dortmund team, as in the players who are there right now? In fact, the better way to phrase that is, if Marco Rosa took over tomorrow and played in the next game, how would Dortmund set up essentially? Do you see, from based on what you've seen at Gladbach?
I don't think it would be too far off what we're seeing with Terzic right now. I'm gonna go with, if there were no injuries, I think we'll see Hit, Guerrero, Hummels, Akanji, Mounier, then a two in front with Chan and Witzel, and then followed by the Sancho, Bellingham, Royce, Haaland. I think that kind of fits his style pretty well, and it is very much what we've seen under Terzic. Quite a lot, the kind of setup and style, but I don't really see how else he would set it up. I could see him go up to the younger players every now, so a bit more of Mukoku, a bit more of Reina, a few more of those, like, mixed around, especially for substitutions. But yeah, I think he kind of likes Rose has been playing that 4-2-3-1 quite a lot this season. Only a few times he's changed it to more of a back 3-5, 3-5-2, but I can't see him doing that when it probably suits him more to get more. Just it's just easier to build up play with that, and especially if you're coming from the back off a counter attack, or if you're trying to be more high intensity, then that's the kind of structure that you'll need with the players that he currently has.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of my that was roughly around my assessment of it, was that, you know, if you're looking at it sort of in depth, yes, of course. I mean, you could arguably say that putting Rosa in instead of Terzic is perhaps the more fashionable, it's the sexier managerial signing. But, you know, and believe me, hey, Marco Rosa, if I'm still looking that good at 46, then, you know, that's hey, that's not, it's not exactly going to be bad going from me. But if you know, just looking at sort of the two styles that they have, you know, it, what are you gaining from sort of bringing in Rosa? Obviously, probably will be on more money. You know, there's the greater expectation than bumping up the assistant. You know, that it does make me question the decision. But as we've discussed, you know, he's a name essentially.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, and he does have the obviously the Salzburg pedigree, the attractive football pedigree. So yeah, and I was just looking there, sort of at Gladbach's recent results, and since the news broke that he would be leaving them, I think the run was, I mean, it's what,
Nine
seven,
losses.
nine
I think
losses.
it might be nine in all competitions because
Yeah,
Man City, DFB Pokal, and I kind of lost count. And then they
and then they,
kept Schalke.
yeah, I was going to say they needed Schalke to break that run, so it's not really, it wasn't really a fair assessment of you know whether the run had been broken or not. But yeah, it that does speak to, sort of to the man management aspect, really, doesn't it? That, you know, as soon as that news broke, you kind of do have. I mean, that it's too much of a coincidence to see that much of a marked drop off without having any major injuries. So, yeah, that'll be interesting to see what happens there.
A good indicator was what was happening in that Hertha match. I think it was the Hertha match or the Freiburg match that I think Kramer from the team has been the one of the loudest, most fire startery ones in the team since the announcement. There's been loads of rumors about what he felt about it, and there's a few telling points that he's like, oh, we don't really need a lot of shouting at halftime to get us back on our feet and stuff like that. And you're just like, has he really lost them? There's a really good point in some of the post-match press conferences with the players. And funnily enough, we don't see enough of Lars Stindl doing media appearances afterwards. 32-year-old captain, you kind of probably want someone like that backing the coach at the moment.
Yeah, a steady hand. Yeah, that would certainly allay any fears there. I'm just thinking, has Christoph Kramer essentially just done the Kanye West, I don't need a manager, I can't be managed? And basically said that, yeah, we yeah, we can sort ourselves out. You know, we don't need Marco Rosa who's ditching us for Dortmund. Maybe he is doing that, but you know, I couldn't possibly say with any certainty. It would be funny if it was though. But yeah, I'm just thinking. I mean, that is all that we have then for this week's podcast. I think we've delved into what could possibly and I think probably will happen when Marco Rosa takes over at Dortmund. I think it's a managerial switch that I and many others at face value, you know, I think we're very excited about. But you know, for Gladbach and, you know, for yourself, I'm sure I mean, especially now, given we've sort of delved into it, if he returns to Borussia-Park next season, takes all 3 points, it might be a little bit of a kick in the teeth. But thank you very much to Jasmine for her insight into German football and this particular topic. I know you're very busy at the moment, so I do really appreciate you coming on to discuss this one with us. And I'm certain that, you know, we'll be seeing a lot more sort of this managerial transfers saga, the Hütter, Rosa, Terzić saga play out a little bit more. But yeah, thank you very much for the background on Rosa and what to expect, really. Is there anything or anywhere you'd like to plug, and how can people find you on Twitter?
Well, I'm on Twitter at _Jasmine Baba. There's a link to my Medium page that I update every now and then there. But yeah, whatever I do just kind of comes quite ad hoc. So if you follow me on there, then that's your best chance of finding out what I'm doing next.
Yeah, there's some fantastic tactics writing on there regarding Frankfurt and what to expect from Adi Hütter at Gladbach next season, if you check that out on Jasmine's timeline. But also remember to check out Scouted Football on YouTube and Patreon, as well as on Twitter and Instagram as usual. There's more exclusive content on the way from us, as well as another handbook cycle, which will be just around the corner, so don't miss out on that. I've been Joe Donoghue, and this has been the Scouted Football Podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in. Stay safe, take care, and bye for now. We've gone years without using the right tools for the job. We've all been there, some manscaping ruined by a shaving accident. That's why Manscaped has just released the new Lawnmower 3.0 trimmer, which features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to reduce those needless grooming accidents. It's even waterproof, so you can use it with ease in the shower. Complete with a USB charging stand, 90 minutes runtime, as well as 20% discount and free delivery when you use the code SCOUTED20. What are you waiting for? Make your testes your besties.